This is Kentucky Afield Radio. This is Ron Rohde, Kentucky Afield's first host back in 1953. Now, I'm proud to present Charlie Baglin.
It's a challenge to stay focused and see the big picture at the same time, especially on a subject as far-reaching as wildlife and wilderness conservation. Today's guest is a master of both. We go inside outdoors with Dr. Bill Martin, a name synonymous with Kentucky ecology since the 1970s. He's now retired from a near 20-year stint as the state's chairman of the Heritage Land Board. We'll talk about that, a life of success, and what's next on Kentucky Afield Radio.
Uncle Chuck, what is fall?
Fall means football, but excitement doesn't end there. This is when Kentucky's outdoors are just getting started. The Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife reminds you lakes and streams are alive with fall fishing. And for many, the biggest game of the season is white-tailed deer. Get your fishing and hunting license and get your game plan together. This fall, take aim on a winning season at fw.ky.gov.
In high school, I got my license and my first license plate, a nature plate. Now that I'm in college, it's still my choice, because year by year, these plates save more and more. More rich forests, more clean flowing streams, more of what we all want to hold on to for our future. If it's the wildcat, cardinal, or the butterfly plate, next time you renew, do like me. Say nature's finest and pick the plate that keeps our bluegrass green.
This is Kentucky Afield Radio. My name is Charlie Baglin, and today we are talking with a recognized leader in land and forest conservation in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Anyone who attended Eastern Kentucky University during the 1970s, 80s, 90s, all the way up to when he retired from there in 2005, may have been taught biology or environmental ethics or any number of any other classes by Dr. Bill Martin, a man who was instrumental in the fight back in the 1970s to keep Red River Gorge from becoming Red River Lake. But the reason Dr. Martin is on our show today is because he has just recently retired from the Kentucky Heritage Land Conservation Fund Board. That's a lot of words. And the Kentucky Heritage Land Conservation Fund Board may mean very little to most people until you realize the fact that that is the board that governs Kentucky's nature license plates. You see them on the highway today with the cardinal, the bobcat, and the viceroy butterfly, and they say nature's finest on them. If you've ever put one of those in your car, truck, or van, then you have helped this fund to buy and preserve 80,000 acres across Kentucky. And our friend Dr. Martin has been chairman of this board since it began, when was that, 1994, 95?
Well, it actually began in 1994, but we began operating in 1995. But in 94 to 95, we had to establish the regulations and all that, so that needs to count too, I guess, Charlie.
Again, it's not easy for some to wrap their head around the Kentucky Heritage Land Conservation Fund. To say it succinctly, we could say that you are the Kentucky Nature License Plate people. Is that fair?
That's right. We develop the license plate, and then we market the license plate as well, as you know, since you're with the marketing committee that does that.
There had to be a lot of forethought going into this. It didn't just happen overnight in 1994. How many years was this board in the making?
The legislative session of 1990 created the Kentucky Heritage Land Conservation Act. And what it did was to establish priorities for the acquisition of land and authorize the creation of a board and authorized funding. Now, authorization doesn't mean you're going to get it. It just means that it's approved. And so neither the board nor the funding came along, but the Act itself, the 1990 Act, did establish the priorities of the fund, and so there was thought went into it prior to 1990 to create that Act. Then 1994, under the Garrison Jones administration, was when we thought we had the people in place to push this Lady Libby Jones and the governor were very much behind it. And then we had support there was support for it up and down through the cabinet and in the General Assembly, for that matter. So we did get the funding and the establishment of the board to administer the fund in the 1994 session. The legislation created the fund, created the board, and authorized the development of these plates that you've seen on the road, beginning with plates in 1995 and then subsequently through the years until the present time.
Now, this fund sounds like it could get easily lost with other, let's just call them charitable funds that exist throughout the landscape. But what this one does and has done for 2 or 3 decades now is buy and preserve land to the tune of 80,000 acres that would not have otherwise been there. That's something, to me, Dr. Martin, that's a feather in the cap for the state.
Well, it is. And certainly the creation of the fund and the board was a big step forward in 1994. And the 80,000 acres is nothing to be sneezed at. But at the same time, just point out that total acreage of the state is 25.8 million. And so it's a very small percentage of the state that has been conserved and preserved with this fund.
And anyone who has ever put a Kentucky Nature license plate on their car, and granted there are many plates out there nature-oriented now, but if your car has ever had one with a dragonfly, a Cumberland Falls, a Kentucky Warbler, what are some of the other plates that have helped contribute to this fund? Can you recall them all?
Yeah, we began with the Kentucky Warbler on a tulip poplar branch, and that plate lasted until we could adopt 3 different plates at one time, which were the cardinal and the bobcat and the native butterfly. Then created as well 3 other plates of the Cumberland Falls and the dragonfly and the hummingbird. In acquiring a plate, $10 of this goes to the Heritage Land Conservation Fund. That's the reason it's $25 plate instead of $15. Mm-hmm. Is that the extra $10 goes to the Heritage Land Fund, and that provides 10 to 15% of our total revenue.
I've looked at expenditures, what I was able to find from the internet. $48 million has been spent on 80,000 plus acres of land in, 61 or 2 counties?
That's right.
The money that goes into this fund doesn't all come from license plates. Where does the money come from for the fund?
Well, there are 2 other sources. The state portion of the unmined minerals tax. For
example?
Coal. It also applies to other hard rock minerals, if you will.
And I heard you mention in there environmental fines.
Right.
And they would be levied against who? Is this manufacturing or individuals or who?
It would be those that are in violation of the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, solid waste regulations, and those laws and regulations that are administered and managed in the state by the Department of Environmental Protection, which deals with water, air, and solid waste. We do not derive anything except from the unmined minerals tax from mining revenues, such as abandoned mine lands or the coal severance tax or any of that sort of thing. All of that goes into revenue that goes to the counties and to the state from the mining of coal.
You have served as chairman of this organization since its inception, and that goes back, you said, to 1994. Are you pleased with what the fund has been able to do? Has it done what you had thought it could or would?
Yes, it certainly has, with what we have. These 3 revenue sources provide us with $4 to $5 million a year for acquisition. It may sound like a lot of money, but it's really not when you're talking about land values that can be anywhere from today $500 an acre upwards of, around urban areas, it may be $4,000 or $5,000 an acre. And so, yes, it has been satisfying to know that amount. But if the fund is strained, and in fact the matter is we really have problems with lands that are going to be over $1 million for the tracts.
We need to take a break, but we will ask the good doctor to hang with us. And when we come back, we'll talk about buying land in the 21st century. It can be a little bit pricey. I'm Charlie Baglin. Stay with us. This is Kentucky Afield Radio. We're back on Kentucky Afield Radio. My name is Charlie Baglin. We are talking to Dr. Bill Martin, recently retired chairman of the Kentucky Heritage Land Conservation Fund Board. In brief, the Nature Plate people, the group that helps to buy and protect natural areas all around Kentucky. Now, before we went to the break, Doctor, we were talking about land ain't cheap, and buying sometimes that can be up to like 1,000 acres.
If it's $500 an acre, then you're not talking about so many acres that $1 million can buy, or can get through conservation easements, which we also can provide funds for. If you have a large tract of land, then that is something that the fund has trouble with, because we don't hold anything in reserve. If projects come to us that are coming from local governments, for example, we don't store the money, save the money and set it aside. If a county government comes to us with a project and we have the money to support them and it fits the priorities of the fund, and we fund it. We don't make any distinction between high quality versus low quality or anything like that.
The board has standards that a land acquisition needs to meet.
Yes.
And if they're met, then they qualify.
That's right.
That's simple.
There are four priorities. One is lands that contain natural areas, containing habitats that are significant to the state and that are harboring rare, special concern, endangered species. Secondly, lands that are important for their functional capabilities, that is, if they're wetlands, or they're providing watershed protection, or green space, or old-growth forests. Or thirdly, lands that are important to migratory wildlife. I think when the General Assembly was thinking about that, they were thinking of migratory waterfowl, but it also applies to songbird migration and other animals that are moving. And then fourthly, for outdoor recreation and environmental education. These four priorities allow for a lot of lands to be eligible for these grants that we provide. And I would point that out, Charlie, is that these are grants. The recipients are not expected to pay the money back into the state. This is money that is given to either state natural resource agencies, such as the Department of Fish and Wildlife, or forestry, or parks, or wild rivers, or Nature Preserves Commission, or to local governments, or to colleges and universities. And so this is funding that is provided as a grant. And
these lands are to be kept in their natural condition or improved as such forevermore.
And they are to be managed as that. That is, we are to consider protecting them for the plants and animals and the landscape that is there, and protecting them against human abuse as well as against invasive plants and animals to the extent we can, to a certain degree restoration, although that is not a mandate that we have. Then in some cases, a part of the planning of management of that land may involve some restoration, but it's to be maintained in its natural condition in perpetuity. You're exactly right.
You had said earlier 25 X million acres across the state of Kentucky, and 80,000 of those acres are acres lands that have been bought with nature license plates and money from your fund, and so 80,000 into 25 million might get lost in the shuffle. Let's take a look. Name a few of the areas around the state and the counties they're in that people certainly have heard of and experienced.
Well, we have over 120 now. We started out with 0, of course, but now we have over 120 that are distributed across over 60 counties. And so some examples are Laterno Woods in Fulton County, which is a bottomland forest, which is a wetland kind of condition, old growth bottomland forest.
The nickname for that locally is the 1,000-acre woods. Am I remembering properly?
It's about 1,000 acres. That's right.
And that is something to witness. These are trees that two people have a difficult time putting their arms around. This is old-growth forest that really you have to see it to understand it.
True. These are big trees. They are big trees that are not along a stream. They're in the level land of western Kentucky. That is, the forest is surrounded by agricultural land. So it's quite significant in that sense. And then that is one example. Another, we've been involved in conserving and preserving portions of the Jefferson Memorial Forest in Jefferson County, which is the largest urban forest in the United States. We've been involved in acquiring lands that go with Blanton Forest, which is a large old-growth tract of forest in Harlan County, Kentucky, with acquiring some protected land for Lily Cornet Woods, which is in Letcher County, with the last remaining large remnant of this open kind of forest of central Kentucky and the central bluegrass, which is called Griffith's Woods. Then some large tracts that are important, as I had mentioned earlier, such as a recent acquisition of Big Rivers that is down in Union and Crittenden counties, upwards of 6,000 acres, as well as over 3,500 acres on Pine Mountain that we acquired actually in our first year of operation. And so then we have lands that are open, non-forested lands that are called glades and barrens that are unusual places because of their soils and because of the geology, because of past disturbances that keep this land open, that are by and large preserved by the Kentucky Nature Preserves Commission and conservation districts across the state.
What was your involvement? What was the board's involvement with the Peabody Wildlife Management Area?
We weren't involved in the acquisition per se, but what we did was to provide the money for the surveying of that large area, which the survey itself was $500,000, and of course that's an important part of management, is that you have to identify what the boundary is of this land that was at once private and now it's public because it's now managed by the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. That was a significant tract as well of several thousands of acres, but what we did was provide the money for the survey. That is a part of management, and that has to be done and is a necessary part of acquisition.
You're basically in the real estate business. It's just you're not going to put a grocery store on the land. You're going to keep wildlife and the habitat there.
Well, that's right. Yeah, it is. It is real estate in the sense of the way people understand it, because in Kentucky State, over 90% of the land is privately owned, and so transferring land from owner to owner is a real estate transaction. And in our case, it's going from willing sellers of some kind, either a corporation or a private individual, to the state.
Looking at the Kentucky Heritage Land Board, it's made up of several agencies. You have Fish and Wildlife, Division of Forestry, League of Kentucky Sportsmen. There are how many board members that sit around the table at the quarterly meetings?
There are a total of 12. includes those that you mentioned, as well as others that we defined by statute. When we were writing the statute in 1994, we decided that there would be state agencies, that would be the state natural resource agencies, as well as organizations that would be conservation-type organizations. It includes League of Kentucky Sportsmen, as you mentioned. It also includes environmental organizations that are recommending appointment of individuals. It includes the Kentucky Academy of Science, because the science of conservation is evaluating lands that fit the priorities. If they don't fit the priorities, then we don't deal with it. Then you also have an individual that is appointed because of their knowledge of land acquisition, especially lands that have mineral estates that are associated with them. The agricultural organizations are also represented. So we have a very broad spectrum of organizations and individuals that are private, as well as the state resource agencies that we've named already.
We have to take a break. We have our fishing report just ahead. But in the next half hour, I want to talk about your tenure at Eastern Kentucky University. And once you were the commissioner of the Department of Natural Resources, so we would like to talk about the politics of conservation. Could get interesting. Dr. Bill Martin is my guest. I'm Charlie Baglin, and you are listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. This is Charlie Baglin back on Kentucky Afield Radio. My home address for the rest of the hour. Saturday, September 7th, this weekend, opens fall deer season for Kentucky deer hunters. The topic this hour on Kentucky Afield is highlights in Kentucky conservation from the career of Dr. Bill Martin. We'll touch on the subject of the Red River Gorge in this half hour. First up, our fishing report.
Well, in western Kentucky, we're starting into what might be fall fishing patterns. The three things I'm thinking for bass fishing is ledges, docks, and shallow. Out on the ledges, using crankbaits, plastics such as worms and lizards. Around the docks, spinner baits, worms and lizards. And then the shallow, some topwater baits. I love a white spinner bait this time of year because there's a lot of shad minnow up there popping the surface. You're probably not going to catch a great big bass, but you're going to catch a lot of little bass up there chasing those shad minnows. And another thing, if you're on Facebook, check out West Kentucky Fishing Club. They have a big bow tournament coming up for silver carp. You might want to look into that. And another good fall fishing is up in the creeks. We've been seeing huge schools of crappie during the fall. So a lot of good fishing opportunities. Just be safe out there as the lake levels start to fall. This is Paul Reister. Hope you find a good day to go fishing.
Hi, this is John Williams for the Fishery Report for Southeast Kentucky. At Lake Cumberland, striped bass fishing has remained good in recent weeks. Most fish caught 30 to 40 feet deep early in the morning on live bait, drifting those. Also hearing some fish deeper, around 60 feet, being caught by trolling jigs on downriggers. Most of the activities in the lower end of the lake, but I have heard some reports up lake also. You can find some good muskie in some of the tributaries of the South Fork Kentucky River. Recent sampling revealed good numbers in Goose Creek in Clay County. You can also find muskie in Sexton Creek and Redbird River and South Fork Kentucky River. And they can be caught on large cranks or spinner baits. And finally, elsewhere in the district, Rock Creek is scheduled for some trout stocking in early to mid-September. So if you like trout fishing, get out and try some of that. As always, good luck and good fishing.
This is Rob Roll with a fishing report for the northwestern section of Kentucky. Nolan and Rough River Lakes are both at summer pool and holding steady, with surface water temperatures in the mid-80s. At Nolan Lake, anglers are picking up a few largemouth bass by fishing plastic worms or lizards in the 12 to 15-foot depth range around some of the steeper rocky banks. Flathead and channel catfish are still active at both reservoirs, the Rough and Nolan. Also keep in mind that our Fens Lakes, Panther Creek Park, Yellow Creek Park, Wayman Morris Park in Davis County, Litchfield City Park, and Madisonville City Parks were all stocked with channel catfish on the 27th, and anglers are doing well catching those fish. Those make for good, short trips with a good chance of catching some nice channel catfish. Please be safe on the water.
Kentucky Afield Radio, Charlie Baglin in a beautiful area of the state, Powell and Wolfe counties. That's another way of saying the Red River Gorge. For hikers, Pomeroyton Quadrangle. More with Dr. Martin about the gorge after the break.
At the absolute worst, it was a little white lie.
A little white lie.
After all, when it hit the line, it felt like a 15-pounder. It doesn't matter what the scale says. So it might be an ever so slight deviation from the truth.
Sometimes in fishing, the truth is hard to catch.
Maybe just a stretch.
But the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife reminds you, fishing isn't about math. It's about fun.
And fudging a little if you need to.
Kentucky fishing.
It'll make a liar out of you.
You know our patch, but there are some things about the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife you may have never dreamed. Like 150,000 acres of wilderness we own for public enjoyment, leading the way in land conservation. From the majestic elk to the short-tailed shrew, healthy habitat helps them all. Kentucky Fish and Wildlife, your partner in the great outdoors. And you thought we were just fishing and hunting. Hunt more at fw.ky.gov.
We continue the conversation with one of Kentucky's leaders in land and natural resource conservation throughout the decades on the occasion of his retirement from the Kentucky Heritage Land Conservation Fund Board, which buys and safeguards wild lands statewide for public use, appreciation, and education. Our guest is Dr. Bill Martin, and since the late 1960s, you have been on the side of everything green before green was a buzzword, from the woods to the classroom. You probably have folks listening to this program who have heard your name or recognize your voice. You were a professor at Eastern Kentucky University. You have influenced a lot of the people with whom we all work today, that they remember you and they've had your classes. Give me the minute message on your time at Eastern Kentucky University.
Put in the career of 35 years total into the university and came there in 1969. Was trained as an ecologist at the University of Tennessee. Got my master's and PhD at UT. Came to the Eastern, taught ecology for non-majors and biology and also general botany and a number of courses that I helped develop in several departments that were environmentally oriented. My first class at Eastern in the fall of 1969, I had 2 classes of 250 students each.
Holy smoke. How can you grade that many papers or that many tests?
By machine.
That would help.
Yeah, what we did, of course, was multiple choice exams, which is not my favorite way of examining things, but if you're going to do it in a timely and efficient fashion, the scientists as a group, be they life scientists or physical scientists, for these general biology courses and botany courses and so forth, they like to have large sections so that they can get to a large number of people. And then, of course, I've had graduate students in which I was teaching advanced ecological courses such as dynamics of ecosystems was a term, and another course that I would develop for grasses and grasslands that would have something like 5, 10 students. That was very much focused and very concentrated and quite technical. There were a number of courses, over 13 of them, that had that kind of environmental thrust to them in one way or the other.
So you have been involved in politics as well as education. I was at one of your meetings recently, and I have a quote here from Dr. Bill Martin. It says, "Trees are important, even though they don't vote." You remember saying that?
Oh, yes.
Hey, I bet you that's not the first time you've said it, but it certainly makes you wonder about the politics of conservation. I was thinking to myself driving over here that biology is as it is. It will evolve over centuries and thousands of years, but it can't evolve at the whims of politics. And that has to be the struggle that you have had when you have sought to support various causes along your career. And the Red River Gorge or Red River Lake was one of those. Can you talk about those years?
The general term of whether or not trees vote is, of course, a fact. And so what conservationists have to do is to act as the stand-ins for the trees and the stewards for the trees. And it's analogous to representing children and representing those that cannot represent themselves. And so what the conservationists do is looking at conserving nature in different forms, and so it's a team effort. It is rare to have one person, although there are examples of one person being extremely influential. It really comes down to a team effort by a large number of people, because we all have to get together and push this, since the trees, millions and billions of them, don't have standing. And so in the Red River case, the Red River Gorge case, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the politicians wanted to build a lake on the Red River, which was a flood control lake, because flooding occurred with some regularity downstream of the Red River Lake proposal to Clay City. And the proposal at the time, with some fortuity, came along with the National Environmental Policy Act, which was passed in 1970, which says that for any federal agency that's going to take on a federal project affecting the environment, there must be an environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement.
Was there such a thing?
There was. With the Red River Gorge case, there was an environmental impact statement. It was a big, thick thing that had extra supplementary material furnished because the Corps had been very much incomplete in the statement, assessing that there would be very little impact of any note that was significant in the Red River Gorge. It was going to be built along the Red River, of course, creating a lake of several miles long that stretched back into the Wild River section. People took on this U.S. Army Corps of Engineers by saying, no, this is not necessary to have this lake. It is millions of dollars that is going to be spent, that is going to be covering up and flooding ecologically significant, and it turns out as well archaeologically significant areas that are along the Red River. Corps presumably had assessed all that, but they had done it with minimal kinds of standards and minimal kind of effort, and so we took them on. What we did was to testify before Congress. We testified before the governor, worked with the Corps, or struggled with the Corps, because the Corps wanted to build that dam, and the politicians in Washington wanted to have the dam built as well as the local folks did. Some of the local folks did.
You don't want to put down flood control, which is important, and I'm thinking the Tennessee Valley Authority and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers certainly has their place, but I have a feeling they are more used to folks like you or local governments just rubber stamping whatever they wanted to do, and that they would always get their way. But apparently this was one of those times where they did not.
That's true. They did not. There was a battle that went on for several years. Well, I took classes by the busload to show them what the impact was going to be and what the results were going to be and what the costs were going to be versus the benefits. Prior to that, Charlie, the action by the Tennessee Valley Authority and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the two major dam constructing agencies of the federal government, did pretty much what they wanted to do and exercised eminent domain whenever anybody gave them any opposition, especially landowners. If landowners were opposed to flooding of their land, then they were paid compensation under the Constitution and had to move. The electricity provided by the Tennessee Valley Authority was extremely valuable to the Tennessee Valley and was an absolute boon to the entire Valley region, which included Tennessee and 6 other states, and that were economically valuable. In the case of the Red River, you're talking about a relatively small lake that had benefit in terms of flood protection. There's no question about flood protection, but it was temporary. It wasn't as if the land was going to be permanently flooded. The water came through there, and flooding occurred. And so within days, however, the river had dropped, and so it was back to the normal stream channel. And so whether or not that was important to have and continue to have these lakes, dams like this, that's what the issue was about. And talking with Governor Carroll and Governor Carroll's representatives, they told us that if you can find something archaeologically associated with, in addition to these endangered plants and animals and rare species, in which there are a number in the Red River Gorge region, rare species aquatically in the river as well as on the land, that would be something that the state could really hang its head on and say these are important resources that should not be destroyed. And we were able to do that quite easily by bringing in archaeologists and anthropologists who showed that the flooding of the Red River would indeed destroy these cultural resources that existed and extended back thousands of years.
Now, this is in the Arch Country of eastern Kentucky, Wolfe County. I've been to Red River Gorge too many times to count, and anybody who has ever hiked Swift Camp Creek or Coomer Ridge or seen the colors in the fall can thank you, among many, for saving Red River Gorge from becoming Red River Lake. This is in the general vicinity of Natural Bridge State Resort Park.
The U.S. Forest Service declared this, the Red River Gorge, a geological area, which has since made it very important from the standpoint of tourism. Going to Natural Bridge State Park and staying there was to visit the Red River Gorge. Rappel down the rocks, but to visit and see the vistas, fish in the Red River, those have been very valuable in terms of recreation and tourism.
And I'm telling you, that area of the state is a gem, and I speak for countless thousands. Again, we're up against the clock. We have just a few minutes left with Dr. Bill Martin, college professor, political activist for the cause of conservation, and recently retired chairman of the Heritage Land Conservation Fund Board, a group within Kentucky government that has collected money to buy and help protect 80,000-plus acres around the state. We'll ask why he didn't seek reappointment when we come back, and just what trail he may be up to following next. Stay with us. I'm Charlie Baglin, and you are listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. We are back on Kentucky Afield Radio. I'm Charlie Baglin. Our last segment with Dr. Bill Martin, an individual who has his fingerprint on virtually everything wilderness in Kentucky. Former commissioner for the Kentucky Department for Natural Resources, which covers the Division of Forestry. Also an author, most significantly, a 3-volume set entitled Biodiversity of Southeastern United States, still available through Amazon. Dr. Martin has led, influenced, and helped to craft the 1998 Kentucky Forestry Conservation Act, and also has decades to his credit in the field of higher education. He was a college professor at EKU. Most recently, has just stepped down from a 20-year term with the Kentucky Heritage Land Conservation Fund. That is a program of Kentucky government that provides funding for natural areas around Kentucky for public use, recreation, and study. And that is the very same group that administers the Kentucky Nature License Plate Program. Those are the colorful plates with the bobcat, the cardinal, and the butterfly on them. They say nature's finest. If you've bought one, you have helped contribute to this fund and buy land to be kept in its natural state forevermore. In other words, will never, ever become a subdivision or a parking lot or a shopping center. I know Dr. Martin well enough to say that I'm sure he is blushing because I have done a very good job of placing him on a pedestal. But when you do good work, that's what happens. He is on the phone with us from his home in Lexington. I wanted to hear what is in the future for Dr. Bill Martin after you have bid adieu to the Kentucky Heritage Land Conservation Fund Board.
I have bid adieu to it. I did not seek reappointment because I'm getting a little bit older, and it's time to move on. And let me say, first of all, Charlie, that any success that I've had in conservation cannot have occurred without the help of a lot of people that were just as dedicated as myself. That's one thing I want to make clear, and to give as much credit as possible to a great number of people who I've had the privilege to work with. And now what I'm going to do is more individual than anything else, although I'm still going to need a lot of help, because what I don't want to do is to write a book about the forests in Kentucky that include the past and what created the conditions the forest has today, what its status is, what its composition is, how healthy is it, and then also look briefly at the future, because you can only with the future, you can speculate, but you don't really know what is going to happen to the forest. But it's not just a green landscape out here. It is really a very diverse part of our natural heritage of Kentucky that is at the center of the deciduous forest of eastern North America, and has an extraordinarily important history, not only a natural history in an evolutionary sense, but also a history in the human sense, that it has developed and it's provided the resources that help to construct Kentucky and make Kentucky what it is and will in the future. That it provides an industry that is robust in terms of timber products, as well as recreational opportunity, as well as wildlife habitat. All of these services that the forest provides is something that I want to write about and talk about it as in the past, in the present, and the future.
It's going to be a big job. I don't know of a soul who's more qualified to do it, and I think that will be certainly a legacy that will last for generations.
I hope so, Charlie. For people listening today, if they have any information with respect to the forests of Kentucky historically, or a particular tract that I should look at, I'd appreciate them getting in touch with me. They can today by the internet, WHM3 at twc.com. WHM3
at twc.com. That is your email address.
That's my email address, right. Yeah, it's going to take me, I figure, about 5 years, Charlie, and it'll take an awful lot of help and resources from an awful lot of people. And right at the present time, what I'm doing is kind of gathering that kind of information together and doing the research into the past and into the present is going to be required.
I just have a hunch that people are going to be lining up to help you because they've known you a long time. They know you stand for what is good and right by forest ecology, and I think that help is going to be a little easier to come by than you may be thinking.
Well, I greatly appreciate that. If anyone listening has got something to contribute, then let me know, and I'll put it on a 3x5 card, and it'll go into a file folder. That's the way I operate, because the human impact on our forests today has been considerable. It's really just a shadow of its former self.
I look forward to seeing it in 5 years.
That's my target anyway, Charlie, and I may be calling on you to give me some help.
You have my number and email address. I certainly want to thank you for taking the time to talk with us here for an hour, and good luck in your retirement, and good luck with the new project.
I greatly appreciate being able to be on your show, Charlie.
You're most welcome, sir. It has been a good hour. You know, most people will buy a Kentucky Nature license plate simply because it's a pretty plate. They put it on the car, the truck, minivan. I mean, it looks good. Not really realizing that the extra few bucks they spend go into this fund to buy land across the state. So it makes your vehicle look good, has a dual purpose. I know a lot of my friends will buy either the Cardinal or the Wildcat plate simply to show their school spirit. If that's for University of Louisville or University of Kentucky, Henry County, wherever the money is going for a good cause. The new chairman, we should point out, for the board for the Kentucky Heritage Land Conservation Fund is, as of July 16th of 2013, Dr. Richard Kessler, professor from Campbellsville University, a great guy and well-respected. If you would like to hear this program again or any of our programs, dig into our past a little bit, there are a few ways you can do it. First, go to myhuntingandfishing.com on the web, myhuntingandfishing.com. Also, you can go to iTunes, subscribe weekly. You can also go to our YouTube channel, shared with Kentucky Afield Television, so you can see what Tim Farmer and the boys have got going on there. We are out of time. This is Charlie Baglin inviting you to join us again in a week. We will go inside, outdoors again, right here on Kentucky Afield Radio.